She walked out of the apartment without raising her voice. No drama, no less plea. Jenny lifted her bag, looked at the door for a moment, and stepped into the hallway like someone who had already cried every tear she had left. That single choice hit Sumit harder than any argument they ever had. He followed her out of the building, confused, shaking, trying to understand how the woman who waited for him for years had reached the point where leaving felt safer than holding on. People always imagine breakups as loud moments. This one felt silent. The silence of too much damage stretched over too many years. Sumit stood on the street, trying to catch his breath, trying to grasp if this was real. He kept asking where she was going, why she packed, why she looked so calm. She did not answer any of those questions. She only said she was tired. Not angry, not dramatic, tired. The tiredness you feel when the same wound keeps reopening. The moment she told him she was heading to the airport, he froze. For years he believed she would never leave. She loved him and he relied on that. He always felt he had more time to fix things, more time to gather courage, more time to convince everyone that their relationship deserved a chance. Now he watched her walk away and realized the time he thought he had was gone. Jenny had spent a decade bending herself into impossible shapes to fit into his world. Waiting for acceptance that never came. Waiting for promises that changed every few months. Waiting for a future that always seemed one decision away but never arrived. Every delay chipped away at her confidence, then her trust, then her peace. When she finally said she was done, she did not blame him. That might have hurt him the most. The street traffic kept moving while they stood there, both stunned. Sumit reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Not out of anger. Out of resignation. She had reached a point where holding on felt like choosing pain. She whispered something under her breath, something he barely heard. She said she did not feel chosen. She had been loyal to him longer than some marriages last, yet she never felt secure. This moment forces you to wonder how many chances a person can give before they decide to save themselves. Her choice came from the weight of years, not one argument. She spent half her life switching between hope and heartbreak. She kept telling herself things would change. She kept trying to believe his reassurances. Every time she thought progress was made, another wall rose in front of them. Another excuse. Another delay. She aged while waiting. She tried to make India feel like home. She tried to fit into his family culture. She tried to be patient when they rejected her over and over again. She saw other couples move forward while she stayed stuck in the same cycle. She watched him panic every time real commitment came closer. She watched him smile at her while choosing comfort over courage. She watched him ask for more time until the relationship felt like a permanent waiting room. So when she walked out that day, she did not look back. She did not ask if he was following her. She already knew he would. He always followed after the shock hit, after the damage grew too large. He chased after her now, insisting they could fix it. Insisting he would talk to his family. Insisting he always loved her. She believed he loved her. She did not believe he would change. Sumit tried to pull her luggage from her hand. His voice broke. His eyes were red. He begged her not to leave India. Not to give up. His body looked like it was collapsing under the fear of losing her. His entire world rested on the hope that she would stay. Kept recalling memories out loud. The first time they met. The day he showed her his neighborhood. The small moments that made them feel like a real couple even when everything around them pushed against them. But memories are not enough when the present feels unbearable. Jenny stepped aside and told him she needed peace. She told him she felt invisible. She told him she had been holding the entire relationship together alone. These were not accusations. They were facts she carried silently for years. She never wanted to make him feel guilty. She wanted a partnership, not another fight for survival. The more she explained, the more overwhelmed he became. He paced on the sidewalk while she called a taxi. He kept trying to stand in front of her like he could block the future from happening. His hands were shaking. His voice kept cracking. At one point, he crouched down, hands on his face, trying to hide how devastated he felt. People on the street slowed down and stared. Jenny asked him to stand up because she did not want him humiliated. Question now lingers: if he loved her this deeply, why did he wait until the end to show it? When the taxi arrived, he tried one last time to convince her. His words were scattered. He kept saying he would fix everything. He promised things he had promised many times. She listened with sad eyes. Then she shook her head. She told him she believed he meant it, but she no longer believed he could deliver it. The driver opened the door. The sound snapped something in him. He reached for her one more time. She stepped back again. It was a soft refusal, not harsh. Kind of refusal that carries years of pain behind it. She told him she needed space to breathe. She said the life she imagined never arrived, no matter how tightly she held on. Her voice was steady. He was the one shaking. She stepped into the taxi and placed her bag beside her. She did not slam the door. She closed it gently. Sumit took a step closer as if he could still change her mind. The driver began to move. Sumit reached for the window, then stopped. His hand hung in the air for a moment before he pulled it to his chest. Taxi turned the corner and vanished into the traffic. He stood alone in the street. His knees buckled. He leaned against a wall to stay upright. His chest heaved. He looked like someone who had lost something he thought would never leave. For the first time, he saw the finality of his choices. Not the big choices. The small ones. The ones he pushed aside. The ones he delayed. The ones he avoided because he thought love would keep her waiting forever. His tears were not only for her leaving. They were for all the moments he let slip by. All the times he hoped problems would solve themselves. All the days he believed love was enough even when she begged him to take action. The real tension now rises because once someone walks away for peace, the next steps are never simple, and you will want to see how this unfolds. The signs started showing long before she booked that ticket. They were subtle at first. A small pause before she answered him. A longer silence when he brushed off a serious conversation. She had always been expressive and warm, but over time parts of her energy dimmed. Viewers noticed it on screen. The laughter softened. The excitement she carried when she first moved to India faded into something quieter. Something guarded. She would sit beside him, nodding along, but her shoulders stayed tense. Her smile felt like it belonged to someone trying to stay hopeful even when hope was slipping. Every season showed a new layer of waiting. Waiting for approval. Waiting for paperwork. Waiting for clarity. She kept asking the same question in different ways. What is our future? She needed reassurance. She needed something solid to stand on. Instead, she kept receiving half answers. Promises without timelines. Plans without action. Became a loop that drained her. One moment that stood out happened during a family meeting on camera. She tried to speak, tried to express that she wanted to be recognized as part of his life. His relatives dismissed her. She sat there nodding politely, but her eyes told another story. They looked tired. They held pain. She kept her voice soft, almost too soft, like she did not want to create conflict, but you could see the ache of being unaccepted. Sumit glanced at her but said nothing strong enough to change anything. That was when people began asking why she stayed so patient. Why she kept forgiving delay after delay. She believed in him. She believed in love. She believed time would eventually bring acceptance. But time did not help. Stacked more pressure on her shoulders. When discussions about marriage returned again, the same barrier appeared. Another stall. Another reason to wait. She tried to hide her frustration, but during one scene she sat on the couch with her hands clasped so tightly they were turning white. She tried to stay calm, but you could see the disappointment sink into her posture. She leaned back, stared at the ceiling for a second, and exhaled slowly. She looked like someone holding back tears she had no energy to cry. Sumit kept saying he was working on things. He said he needed to balance family expectations. He said everything would fall into place. She heard these promises for years, and each time he said them with sincerity. That sincerity made her stay longer than she should have, kept her believing change was possible. But sincerity without commitment becomes a slow heartbreak. This growing shift in her spirit makes you wonder how long a person keeps shrinking themselves before they finally stop. Another moment came when she cooked for him after a small disagreement. She tried to lighten the mood, adding a little English banter. She joked about burning the food if he did not appreciate her enough. Usually he laughed. This time he barely looked up from his phone. She placed the plate in front of him and sat down quietly. Her face had that blank, tired look people get when they no longer have the energy to fight for attention. She picked at her own food without appetite. Viewers picked up the change instantly. She was still trying, but the spark was fading. Even her tone shifted. She stopped explaining her feelings in detail. She began giving short answers. Not rude, not cold, simply weary. When she once tried to share how unsafe she felt in the relationship, she paused for a long moment before speaking. That pause held years of swallowed emotion. There was another scene when she mentioned she wanted to feel secure as she got older. She wanted structure. She wanted a plan. She said she did not want to be left alone in a foreign country without support. As she said that, her voice cracked. She looked at him for reassurance. He froze. His hesitation lasted only a second, but it hit her like a lifetime. In that hesitation, she saw the truth she avoided. He loved her, but fear controlled his decisions. And she had run out of time to live in fear with him. She tried to raise the topic again later, but her energy was thin. She asked him softly if he had made progress. He smiled like everything was fine and told her to trust him. Her eyes did not soften this time. They stayed distant. She smiled back politely, but her jaw tightened. The audience noticed she was no longer convinced. The most revealing scene happened during a dinner where they tried to talk about their future again. She wore a simple outfit, her hair tied back. No excitement. No lightness. She sat with her shoulders hunched, hands folded on the table. Sumit explained his family concerns again. She listened in silence. At one point she looked away from him and stared at the empty seat beside her. She looked lost. That silent stare said more than any dialogue. When he finished talking, she said she understood. But the tone was different. Sounded like giving up. Not giving up on him, but giving up on the idea that change was coming. Her energy no longer begged for clarity. It accepted the absence of it. This shift should make anyone pause, because when someone stops pleading for change, they have already started planning their escape. Another telling moment happened during a festival episode. Others danced and celebrated. She smiled along, but it looked forced. Her movements were slow. She stayed in the background. She did not cling to him the way she used to. She stood with some distance, watching him laugh with friends while she tried to enjoy herself. When the camera panned to her, she swallowed hard. Her eyes were glossy. She wiped them quickly before the scene cut. There was also the issue of her visa. Every time paperwork came up, she looked anxious. She wanted stability. She wanted him to take the lead. Instead, he hesitated again. She felt unsafe emotionally and practically. She grew more withdrawn. When talking to producers, she mentioned being tired of uncertainty. Those words were soft, but they carried a breaking point. The final sign appeared in one of their last sit-downs. She said she felt like a guest in her own relationship. Her voice trembled. She said she did not want to force herself into a place she was not wanted. That line stayed with viewers. You could see the heartbreak behind it. She loved him deeply, but she no longer felt rooted. Sumit tried to reassure her, but reassurance without action becomes noise. She nodded at his words like someone who had already accepted the truth. When she walked away from that conversation, her steps were slow, heavy, final. She had reached the edge of her emotional capacity. These moments stacked up until they created one overwhelming realization. Staying meant continuing the same cycle. Leaving meant reclaiming peace. Over time, she chose peace. What you will see next is how that choice transforms everything, including the part of the story even Sumit never expected. Sumit did not wake up one day and decide to let the relationship slip. His pattern formed slowly, through hesitation that looked harmless in the moment but grew into a wall between them. He tried to hold two worlds together, his family on one side and Jenny on the other, and the strain showed in nearly every season. When the cameras caught him hesitating, it was never evil or calculated. It was fear. It was pressure. It was the weight of expectations that he never learned how to face without shutting down. One of the earliest signs came when he admitted he never told his parents the full truth about his relationship. He sat on the sofa fidgeting with his hands while Jenny looked at him, waiting for him to finally draw a line. Instead, he softened his voice, tried to explain how difficult it felt. He wanted peace with everyone, and in the process he created peace with no one. Cameras showed his struggle clearly. He would talk about love with confidence, but whenever the topic shifted to family approval, his face changed. His confidence shrank. His shoulders slumped. His voice lost its strength. During a family gathering aired on the show, his parents confronted him with their disapproval. He kept saying he respected them. He kept asking them to understand him. His mother did not budge. His father repeated his discomfort. Sumit stared at the floor while they spoke, nodding, breathing heavily, trying to find the courage to speak up. Jenny sat beside him, silent, hoping he would take the lead. When the moment arrived for him to stand up for the relationship, his voice broke. He said he needed time. That single request became the theme of their entire journey. He wanted to protect her, yet every time conflict approached, he went quiet. On camera, he once admitted he felt torn between duty and love. He said he did not want to hurt anyone. He said he wished everyone could be happy together. It sounded sweet, but the reality was painful. Someone always paid the price for his indecision, and most of the time it was Jenny. This tug of war inside him creates a question that hangs over every episode. How long can a person freeze before the consequences catch up? Another moment came during the wedding pressure storyline. Jenny pushed for clarity. She asked when they would finally move forward. He promised he was working on it. He said he had spoken to someone. He said he was trying. But the producers caught a scene where he admitted he had not taken the steps he claimed. He looked guilty saying it. Not malicious, not careless, guilty. Kind of guilt you see in someone who knows they are disappointing the person they love but cannot bring themselves to face the difficult conversations needed to change. There was also the time he asked the astrologer for guidance. That session showed his conflict clearly. He leaned forward, eyes restless, like a child hoping for permission to follow his heart. The astrologer gave answers that allowed him to delay again. He accepted those answers quickly. Jenny looked frustrated. She wanted him to push past excuses. He wanted the comfort of permission. That difference created another fracture. A powerful moment happened in the kitchen during an emotional conversation. Jenny told him she felt tired of carrying the uncertainty. She wanted something stable. He reached for her hand but hesitated before speaking. Camera zoomed in on his face. He looked lost. His eyes darted to the side like he was searching for words that could fix everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. He told her to trust him. But he did not follow it with a plan. She nodded, but her face showed she no longer believed promises without action. In another aired scene, his parents told him again that they would never fully accept the relationship. Instead of challenging them, he sat quietly with his head down. His mother cried. He panicked. He tried to comfort her. Jenny watched from a distance. That moment showed their entire dynamic. He tried to protect everyone, and he ended up hurting both sides. When the conversation ended, he looked exhausted. He told the cameras he wanted to make everyone happy. That desire controlled him. This makes you wonder if loving two sides at once left him trapped in a position where no choice ever felt safe. During a festival, he danced with friends while Jenny looked distant on the sidelines. When he noticed, he approached her and tried to make her smile. He could sense her sadness, but he did not acknowledge the deeper issue. He tried to lighten the mood instead of addressing the wounds. Viewers saw a pattern. He avoided difficult emotions because they made him uncomfortable. He used humor, distractions, or gentle reassurance to cover cracks that needed real repair. Another revealing moment came when he told cameras he feared losing his family forever if he fully committed to Jenny in the way she needed. That fear showed in his eyes. It was not hatred. It was not selfishness. It was survival. He had grown up in a home where family unity mattered. Breaking that unity felt impossible for him. He tried to keep the relationship alive using love alone, but relationships built on fear eventually weaken. When the marriage decision surfaced again, he stalled. He asked for time again. The cameras caught Jenny standing beside him, expression blank. She had heard it too many times. He hugged her tightly, almost desperately. But hugs cannot replace commitment. Producers recorded him later talking to a friend, admitting that he felt stuck between two worlds. He said he wished the situation were easier. He said he did not want to be the reason anyone suffered. His voice cracked as he said it. The more he tried to protect his family from pain, the more pain he created for Jenny. The more he tried to slow things to keep balance, the more he lost balance inside the relationship. When he looked into the camera and said he did not want to lose her, he meant every word. But wanting something and fighting for it are not the same thing. Jenny kept waiting for him to choose action. He kept waiting for a moment where no one got hurt. That moment never arrived. There was a scene where he told her he loved her deeply but was scared of the fallout. His voice was soft. His hands trembled slightly. Jenny told him she loved him too. Her voice was calm. But she needed more than words. His silence after her statement spoke volumes. He had the chance to step forward. He stepped back. In one of their final tense scenes, he admitted he feared she would leave if they kept delaying. His fear looked real on camera. He paced the room. He rubbed his face. He said losing her would destroy him. Yet even with that fear pressing on him, he still could not take decisive steps. That contradiction became the heart of their downfall. He was not uncaring. He was not unloving. He was scared. He was raised to follow family expectations. He was conditioned to avoid conflict. He was overwhelmed. But fear does not protect relationships. It weakens them slowly until the person on the other side cannot carry the weight anymore. When viewers reflect on his journey, they feel sympathy. They see a man trying and failing at the same time. They see a man torn apart by loyalty. But sympathy does not erase the damage. His delays created distance. His hesitations created doubt. His silence created emotional loneliness for someone who only ever wanted clarity. The story now reaches a point where each of his delays sets up a dramatic fallout, the moment when reality hits harder than any argument ever did. The pressure from Sumit's family was never background noise. It was the constant drumbeat that shaped nearly every decision, every hesitation, every awkward pause in the relationship. On camera, the tension was visible in the stiff smiles, the quick glances, the subtle but heavy sighs. The family's expectations hovered over Jenny and Sumit like a storm cloud that never broke, and the way he responded, or failed to respond, had consequences Jenny could feel in every fiber of her being. The first time viewers saw real friction was during a family dinner scene. Sumit tried to introduce Jenny as someone important, someone serious. His parents barely looked at her, their conversation layered with subtle but cutting reminders that she was an outsider. His mother questioned everything, her background, her habits, her intentions, while he nodded silently as if the weight of tradition could not be challenged without risking a greater storm. Jenny smiled politely, nodded, and said nothing. Cameras caught every blink, every subtle tightening of her jaw, every moment of internal calculation. She was walking on eggshells, performing patience she had already stretched thin. On social media, fans exploded over these moments. Why does he let his family treat her like that? When will Sumit stand up? Jenny deserves better. Comments reflected what many viewers sensed intuitively. Love alone is not enough when one partner must constantly negotiate with a third party for basic respect. These comments were more than internet noise. They mirrored the very real tension Jenny faced every day. And on camera, you could see it gnawing at her, shaping her body language and tempering her expectations. The arguments that followed on screen only reinforced the pressure. In one scene, Sumit tried to calm his mother after she made a pointed remark about Jenny's lifestyle. He said soothing words, tried to explain, tried to mediate. But each attempt was a tiny surrender. The audience could see the frustration building in Jenny. She asked him directly, "Do you think they will ever accept me?" He hesitated, caught between honesty and diplomacy before answering, "I hope so." Hope is a fragile thing when you are waiting for it decade after decade. The family's influence was relentless. There was the time when Sumit's father expressed disapproval of their wedding timeline. On camera, Sumit tried to negotiate, said he would consider delaying certain steps to satisfy them. The look Jenny gave him was subtle but sharp, a combination of disbelief and hurt. She had already been patient for years, and the repeated stalling now felt like indifference. Each delay fueled her growing awareness that love, even when genuine, cannot survive without tangible support. If someone loves deeply but fails to act against unfair pressure, can love alone sustain a relationship? Think about it. Public arguments added another layer. During one heated on-camera discussion, Jenny confronted Sumit. "I am tired of always waiting. I am tired of being polite while you try to protect everyone else first." The scene was raw, real. Sumit's eyes shifted between his mother and Jenny, caught in a bind that had haunted him for months. He muttered excuses, tried to explain, tried to soothe, and yet the tension escalated. The cameras lingered on Jenny's expression, calm yet sharp, a quiet storm that spoke volumes. Fans debated endlessly. Is Jenny being too harsh? Is Sumit trapped? Where is the line between loyalty and cowardice? These questions were valid, and the narrative deliberately left them open-ended. The audience could empathize with Sumit, but empathy didn't erase the reality that inaction has consequences. Emotional pressure, when unaddressed, compounds, creates frustration, resentment, and eventually a breaking point. Jenny's breaking point came into sharper focus during these moments. It was not just verbal pressure. Small, seemingly inconsequential gestures weighed heavily over time. Jenny noticed the micro-expressions of doubt from Sumit's parents whenever she spoke. A pause here, a barely audible sigh there, a raised eyebrow. Each one became a reminder that her presence was never fully accepted. Sumit tried to mediate these moments, but his mediation often meant pacifying his family rather than asserting boundaries, leaving Jenny to navigate the emotional fallout alone. Another aired scene revealed the toll more clearly. Jenny was quiet for most of a family gathering. When Sumit's mother pressed a delicate but pointed question about his commitment, he avoided eye contact, mumbled vague reassurances, and the tension thickened. Jenny left the room shortly after, shoulders tense, lips pressed together. Cameras captured the subtle but powerful truth. She had begun emotionally detaching, the first step toward the eventual decision to leave. Have you ever stayed in a situation where you felt like your voice was always second to someone else's expectations? That feeling is exhausting, and viewers could see it written all over Jenny's posture, expressions, and small hesitations. As seasons progressed, the family pressure never lessened. On-screen conversations showed repeated attempts at negotiation, compromise, and appeasement. Sumit's attempts were earnest but always measured, careful, calculated. He wanted harmony, but harmony for him often meant quiet for Jenny. Cumulative impact was unmistakable. She learned to mask her frustration with smiles, to soften her words, to bite back emotions that the audience could feel bubbling just beneath the surface. Social media reactions mirrored this tension. Fans highlighted moments where Jenny's patience cracked or where Sumit hesitated to confront his family. How much more can she take? Came a recurring question. Why doesn't he choose her? Others tried to defend Sumit. It's not easy to stand up to your parents like that. Comments themselves became a secondary narrative, a real-time measure of emotional stakes and audience engagement. Yet the key takeaway is subtle but powerful. Watching the footage, it's clear. Constant pressure from a loved one's family is not just an external factor. It actively shapes behavior, erodes patience, and creates tension in ways that ripple through every interaction. Sumit's repeated attempts at negotiation, though well-intentioned, often shifted the burden to Jenny. She bore the brunt of emotional compromise, adapting and enduring in ways that were invisible until the breaking point finally arrived. In one of the more tense-aired interactions, Sumit admitted quietly to the camera, "I don't want to disappoint anyone." It was honest and it was relatable. But disappointment is not the same as action. His inaction, shaped by fear of family fallout, left Jenny navigating a relationship on uneven ground. She wanted partnership. She wanted certainty. She wanted him to risk the discomfort that comes with standing up for love. Instead, she received gentle reassurances, excuses, and repeated delays. Can you love someone and still fail them every day by not defending the relationship against outside pressures? Think about how often silence or hesitation becomes the unspoken betrayal in a relationship. The emotional toll was mutual, though. While Jenny's frustration and eventual detachment were visible, Sumit's stress and guilt were equally apparent. Episodes captured him pacing, muttering to himself, or staring blankly after difficult conversations. He carried anxiety, remorse, and confusion, all while trying to honor the cultural expectations that had shaped his life. The audience could sympathize, yet sympathy did not equal resolution. By the end of Act 4, the pattern is clear. Family pressure did not just complicate the relationship, it fundamentally shaped it. Every delay, every compromise, every muted disagreement layered tension on top of tension. Jenny's emotional exhaustion became inevitable. Sumit's fear-driven inaction created cracks that widened season after season. Their love was real, but the pressures surrounding it ensured that love alone could never survive without decisive action. When you consider the influence of external expectations on your own relationships, what boundaries are you willing to enforce, and when does compromise become a silent sacrifice? The answers are never simple, and in this story they carried a lifetime of consequences. The stage is now set for the next act, where the culmination of years of pressure, hesitation, and emotional strain leads to a decision that changes everything. The air felt heavier that morning. Jenny wasn't pacing, she wasn't crying, she wasn't even talking much. But everything about her, how she moved, the way she touched the edge of her suitcase, the small, deliberate folds of her clothes, screamed finality. Sumit, on the other hand, hummed in the kitchen, making chai, completely unaware that this would be the last normal morning they'd share in the same house. Have you ever realized the quiet can hit harder than a scream? Every glance Jenny gave Sumit was measured. Not cold, not angry, just unreadable. For someone who had spent years pleading, negotiating, and waiting, this calm was louder than any shout she could have thrown. Her body said, "I'm done." Her eyes whispered, "I've carried this alone too long." And yet, Sumit didn't notice the tremble in her hand when she tucked the scarf he bought her 4 years ago, the one they wore on a temple visit he always brags about on camera. Why do we only see what we want to see, even when the signs are screaming? She leaned against the wall, taking a slow breath, her face neutral, almost robotic in its control. The air between them was thick, every second stretching like taffy. Sumit, oblivious, poured chai into mismatched cups. "Jenny, chai ready," he called. No response. Just silence. A pause. Then the softest sniff, barely audible. That sound was like a punch. It wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It said, "I'm leaving." And just like that, the first seed of panic planted itself in Sumit's chest. Ever notice how a tiny sound can feel like the beginning of an earthquake? Jenny's hand lingered over the zipper of her suitcase. She didn't rush, didn't fidget. She simply moved as though the act itself, zipping up her life, was a matter of principle. Sumit approached, frowning, still holding cups of tea, his mind trying to find excuses, maybe hoping it was a weekend trip, a temporary pause, anything but the truth. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice light, almost teasing. He didn't know how much history that single question carried. He didn't see the years of waiting behind her calm face. She looked at him, blinked slowly, and whispered, "Home. To America." The words hit like a thunderclap, soft but fatal. When was the last time quiet words destroyed more than screams ever could? For years, viewers had seen the tug-of-war, love entangled with cultural tension, family disapproval, delayed promises. But this moment was different. Jenny wasn't negotiating. She wasn't hoping. She was choosing herself. And Sumit froze, the cup of chai trembling in his hand. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. The decades of soon, maybe, and I'll talk to them had finally crystallized into something he couldn't ignore. Do you know that feeling when you realize your entire relationship has been on pause while the other person was ready to play forward? Jenny continued packing, methodically, almost ceremonially. Every fold of her blouse, every scarf tucked in, was a quiet monument to years of patience stretched beyond capacity. She sniffled, a single tear escaping. Not dramatic, not performative, real. Sumit noticed too late. Panic hit. He tried to find a door back to what they had, some argument, some loophole, some desperate move he could pull at the last second. He reached for her hands, tried to anchor her to the life they had promised each other. "Jenny, please talk to me. Don't walk away like this," he pleaded, but the calm that had once felt like neutrality now felt like a wall too high to scale. Have you ever been locked out by someone's silence even when they are right in front of you? She looked at him finally, her eyes tired but piercing. "If I told you, I wouldn't be able to leave," she said. And just like that, every misstep, every half-hearted apology, every promise delayed for a decade flashed across Sumit's mind. That's when the panic fully landed. "Today? Your flight is today," he stammered. She nodded, minimal movement. The zipper clicked like a gavel. The sound was final. It was a verdict he had been hoping to avoid. Why do we always hope people will change at the last second instead of seeing what's been there all along? He tried bargains, suggestions, even desperate offers. "I'll move. I'll call them. I'll do it now. I swear." Jenny didn't flinch. Her calm voice cut through the panic like glass. "You won't. You never do." She wasn't cruel. She was exhausted. Every promise he made over the years had turned into background noise for a heart already overworked by waiting. Sumit could sob, scream, kneel, none of it mattered anymore. Her decision had been made. How long can love survive when one person is always holding the weight of the relationship alone? Minutes stretched like hours. Jenny finally stood, suitcase in hand, and walked toward the door. Each step was deliberate, her gaze slightly lowered but firm. Sumit followed, barefoot, heart racing, begging, shouting, pleading, still hoping a last-minute miracle could rewrite 10 years of delays. Every word he said reminded her of the times she had stayed silent to protect him, to smooth over his fears, to accommodate his family. This was the inversion. Now the stakes were hers, and she was in control. Do you ever notice how when the shoe switches sides, everything feels sharper, heavier, unavoidable? Outside, the taxi waited. The driver was calm, unaware of the drama about to unfold in the rearview mirror. Sumit sprinted, calling her name, tears streaming, voice breaking. "Jenny, please don't go. I can fix it. I'll follow you anywhere." Jenny turned her head just slightly, meeting his eyes. There was recognition, history, pain, but not hesitation. She pressed the handle, eased the door open, and settled into the seat. Sumit's hand hovered over the window, helpless. Every attempt to grab back control, to pull her into the life they had hoped for, failed. Isn't it ironic how sometimes showing up too late can hurt more than never showing up at all? As the car pulled away, Jenny's hand clutched the suitcase handle, fingers trembling but not shaking. Her eyes, wet, were scanning the fading apartment one last time. She whispered to herself, "I didn't want to hurt him, but I couldn't stay broken to keep him whole." Sumit collapsed mid-street, a man undone by his own hesitation, realizing for the first time that love without action is hollow. She wasn't leaving because she stopped loving. She was leaving because survival demanded it. Have you ever stayed too long somewhere you were never truly safe, only to realize leaving was the bravest act of all? And even as the car disappeared down the street, the weight of 10 years, of countless promises broken, of silence tolerated, of hope misplaced, hovered in the air. For the first time, Jenny could breathe. Sumit, meanwhile, was left to reconcile the fact that love, without decisiveness and protection, wasn't enough to hold someone who had already given everything. The lesson landed hard. You can love endlessly, but if your actions don't align with your words, someone's heart will eventually stop waiting. How many of us wait for change that never comes, only realizing the cost when it's too late? 10 years of waiting can vanish in 2 hours. Would you have recognized the signs or kept hoping until it was too late? The morning after the confrontation, Jenny moved with a quiet purpose. Nothing dramatic, no yelling, no chaotic packing, just a methodical, almost surgical approach to extracting herself from a life that had kept her hostage for far too long. She started with her wardrobe, each item carefully folded, stacked, and placed into her suitcase. It wasn't a frantic frenzy. It was a checklist, a final report of everything she had invested emotionally and physically into a relationship that hadn't reciprocated. Ever noticed how the calmest actions can carry the heaviest emotional weight? As she organized, she glanced at small keepsakes, photos from festivals, souvenirs from trips, mementos that once held shared joy. A faint smile crossed her lips, almost sarcastic, like she was thinking, "Wow, I really did this, huh?" Not for Sumit, not for the camera, not for anyone. For herself. She zipped up a box labeled Memories, the irony thick in the air. The memories once meant to bind them, now ready to leave the country with her. She even paused at a tiny brass statue Sumit had bought her on a temple visit. "Guess even gods can't fix everything," she muttered under her breath. Have you ever felt the need to laugh at how serious life has been just to survive the moment? Her phone was next. Jenny scrolled through months of unread messages, ones she hadn't responded to because they were just noise, people telling her to wait, to compromise, to hope. She deleted most, archived a few, and left the rest. There was a method to it: declutter emotionally before leaving physically. No guilt, no dramatics. Just boundaries finally enforced. Even her cat, sprawled lazily on the bed, seemed to sense the shift. One paw stretched toward her as if asking, "So, you're really doing this?" She chuckled softly and shook her head. Sometimes even pets seem to understand the gravity of human mistakes before the humans do. Jenny paused by the window. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting patterns across the floor. She watched the street below, familiar faces going about ordinary lives. But her life had been anything but ordinary for the last decade. Each step she had taken for Sumit's comfort, each compromise, every silent surrender to family pressure, had accumulated into this single decisive moment. She breathed deeply. "Okay, Jenny. No crying. Not yet. You've survived worse," she muttered. Do you ever notice how the hardest battles are the quiet ones fought alone, inside your own head? Kitchen became her next battlefield. She packed away utensils, small appliances, little things that might have once symbolized domestic comfort. She opened the fridge, stared at the half-used yogurt and leftover chutney. Even my food is judging me, she joked to herself. And for a moment, just a brief moment, humor became armor. This wasn't a melodrama, it was strategy. Every decision was calculated, every gesture intentional. Sumit's absence in the room didn't make her sad. It reinforced that the waiting, the pleading, the hoping had been hers alone. Ever notice how absence can be louder than any argument ever was? Her suitcase now fully packed, she sat on the bed and checked her documents: passport, tickets, boarding passes, a few necessary cards. Every paper a symbol, not of escape, but of agency. This was the power she had quietly built over years of compromise. And yet, even with the weight of planning, she allowed herself small, sharp observations about the absurdity of it all. All this drama over someone who still can't pick up a phone on time, she muttered, shaking her head. Humor kept her steady, like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. Do you ever find that laughter, even small and bitter, can feel like a victory in itself? Her phone buzzed. Sumit had texted. Predictable, anxious, full of last-minute appeals and promises. Jenny read them, sighed, and left them unopened. She didn't need to argue, explain, or justify. Words would not undo the years of inaction and indecision. She focused on herself, her journey, the flight that would soon carry her away from the cycle that had drained her spirit. There was a strange comfort in this quiet rebellion. Ever wonder why the hardest decisions often bring the most peaceful moments immediately before chaos erupts? Packing complete, Jenny moved to her bag of personal electronics, chargers, and headphones. Everything she would need, nothing she wouldn't. She paused, holding Sumit's favorite hoodie she had promised to wash months ago but never did. A small smirk crossed her face. Better late than never, she said, tossing it in. The little sarcastic quips became a rhythm, a way to reclaim voice in a life where so much had been muted. Why do you think humor often follows heartbreak so closely? Because it's the only weapon left when love fails you. Before leaving, she withdrew from one final conversation, herself. She sat cross-legged on the bed, closed her eyes, and counted to 20 slowly. 1, 2, up to 20. She pictured herself stepping onto the plane, away from waiting rooms of uncertainty, away from the constant dance of approval and hesitation. Plan was clear, the path open, and the future uncertain, but hers to own. Every inhale a declaration, every exhale a farewell. Do you ever give yourself a final pep talk, knowing no one else can make you strong enough to walk away? Taxi honked outside, signaling it was time. Jenny picked up her bags, slung them over her shoulder, and paused for a moment at the door. She looked back at the apartment, the walls that had contained love, frustration, hope, and fear. A faint laugh escaped her lips. Not cruel, not mocking, just a sharp acknowledgement of everything she had endured. Well, that was fun, she whispered sarcastically, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe she had survived the circus for this long. Then, calm and composed, she stepped into the car. Have you ever laughed at the absurdity of your own endurance just before rewriting your life? The engine started, and as the car pulled away, Jenny reclined in her seat, hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She didn't second-guess. Instead, she reflected. Each memory, each argument, every compromise flashed in her mind, and she allowed herself small, wry commentary. Wow, some people are impossible, she thought. And some of us are way too patient. Humor mingled with reflection, sadness with relief. This was her exit, but also her reclamation. Isn't it amazing how leaving can feel like finally taking a deep, necessary breath? She checked her phone one last time. Sumit had called repeatedly, left messages, all ignored. No panic from her side, just quiet acknowledgement that the years of waiting were over. The flight, the future, and the freedom it represented had become more tangible with every passing minute. Jenny wasn't running, she was walking steadily toward her life. One decision at a time, one boundary at a time, she was finally in charge. How often do we forget that walking away isn't losing, it's surviving? By the time the car reached the airport, Jenny had transformed the tension into calm energy. She handled the check-in with patience, the security lines with focus, the boarding process with quiet confidence. Even small irritations, a misplaced boarding pass, a long line, were met with a smirk or a sarcastic mutter. She had learned, in a decade of chaos, how to reclaim control over every small situation. And in doing so, she'd reclaimed herself. Isn't it funny how the hardest days of your life can also be the most liberating when you finally make the right choice? As she walked toward the gate, Jenny glanced once more at the crowds, the lights, the announcements, and thought of Sumit. No malice, no hatred, just a quiet acknowledgement that some love stories end not because the love dies but because surviving yourself matters more. Her steps quickened. The gate loomed, and the finality of each step carried weight that words could never capture. For the first time in years, she moved freely, unanchored by promises unkept, unbound by hesitation. Have you ever realized that the bravest act of love is sometimes leaving the person you love behind? Quietest departures often carry the loudest lessons. Would you have stayed or finally walked away like Jenny? The moment Jenny left, the apartment felt empty in ways that no one could have predicted. Sumit stood frozen in the doorway, the echo of the front door slamming still bouncing in his ears. It wasn't just a sound, it was a signal. A wake-up call he had been ignoring for years, but this time the consequences were immediate. For the first time, he felt the weight of inaction. Have you ever realized too late that ignoring a problem only makes it bigger? He moved around the apartment almost instinctively, touching the spots where she had sat, scanning the spaces she had occupied, and every corner reminded him of what he had failed to protect. The bed, the kitchen counter, even the tiny brass statue she had left behind, everything screamed the same truth. She wasn't just gone physically, the emotional presence she carried for years was gone too. And with it, the excuses, the delays, the "I'll do it tomorrow" promises that had defined his approach to love. How many times do we wait for a sign before realizing the moment has passed? Sumit's phone lit up with notifications, all from Jenny. A brief message sent before she turned off her line for the flight. He read it over and over, searching for something he could have done differently, anything that could reverse this. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to write, to plead, to explain, but the words felt hollow. Action now seemed urgent, but the urgency was coming 10 steps too late. Why do we only realize the value of someone when we are about to lose them? He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. The apartment was quiet, almost oppressively so, filled only with the echoes of the life they had tried to build. Every delay, every hesitation, every small compromise he had asked of her now felt like a chain wrapped around his own shoulders. The fear of losing Jenny wasn't just about love, it was about recognizing the cost of inaction. He had waited, hesitated, tried to balance family expectations, and now that waiting had created a void too big to fill. How often do we mistake delay for care? Messages started coming from friends and relatives, some aware of the tension, others completely oblivious. They asked why he wasn't calling, why he hadn't tried harder, why the crisis had escalated. Their concern only amplified his panic. Sumit realized he had spent years rationalizing the waiting game, telling himself that he was doing the right thing, that love could survive pauses, delays, and indecision. Now he was confronted with the brutal truth: love alone wasn't enough. Do you ever see someone slipping away and realize that your own indecision pushed them toward the exit? The first sign of real panic came when he walked through the apartment again, touching the things she had packed, the clothes she had chosen to take, the small personal effects left behind. Each item a reminder that she had thought ahead, planned carefully, and prioritized herself over the inertia he had clung to. Sumit's mind raced through years of missed opportunities. Birthdays forgotten, promises postponed, moments when he could have chosen her over the family pressures but didn't. Every memory felt like a missed alarm, a door closing that he had left ajar for too long. Have you ever wished for a rewind button when the consequences are already irreversible? He tried calling her, sending frantic texts, but each ring unanswered added fuel to the fire of his regret. The delay in action had finally caught up. Each unanswered call, each ignored message, hammered home the truth. Jenny wasn't going to wait any longer. She had reached the edge and stepped off it. And Sumit, for all his love, was left on the precipice, staring down at the emotional fallout he could no longer control. Do you ever notice that desperation only comes after the opportunity to prevent it has passed? Memories played like a slideshow in his mind. The small arguments over family visits, the whispered reassurances he never followed through on, the subtle cues he failed to notice, the slow erosion of patience and trust. Each one was a receipt, undeniable proof that action, not love, was the currency that mattered. Sumit's fear wasn't just about losing a partner, it was about confronting the reality that his inaction had created the space for her departure. He loved her, yes, but love without choice, without decisive action, is fragile. Have you ever loved someone so much that you thought it could survive neglect, only to discover that love needs more than just feeling? He paced the apartment, words muttered under his breath, questions he couldn't answer echoing in the walls. What if he had said yes to her earlier? What if he had stood up to his family, refused to postpone, chosen her over hesitation? Each scenario felt like a dagger twisting in the gut. Sumit's panic wasn't over what was happening now, it was over all the moments he had let slip through his fingers. The realization hit him in layers. Jenny's leaving wasn't a sudden shock. It was the inevitable result of years of waiting, delaying, and compromising. Isn't it tragic how we often recognize the problem only when the solution has disappeared? Even friends who had supported him began asking pointed questions. Why didn't he fight harder? Why had he let things get to this point? Sumit had no answers, only a gnawing awareness that his hesitation had made her final decision necessary. The audience could almost feel the internal conflict, guilt, love, fear, and helplessness tangled in one overwhelming mix. Every sigh, every shake of his head, every step back from the phone reinforced the painful clarity. Jenny had chosen survival and he had left the choice to chance. When someone finally walks away, do we understand that their absence is the loudest truth? His mind wandered to the small moments on camera where she had tried to signal her limits. Eye rolls, pauses in conversation, subtle withdrawals. He had laughed them off, assumed patience, assumed love would carry them through. But those tiny moments had been whispers of a breaking heart. The delayed urgency he finally felt was a storm arriving too late. Sumit's emotional collapse was not melodramatic. It was a raw, human response to realizing that timing and action matter as much as intention. Do we confuse waiting with understanding when sometimes it's just avoidance? Sumit sat back, staring at the empty chair she had left behind. His breathing was shallow, punctuated by silent questions. Could he have done more? Should he have chosen differently? Why had he waited so long for clarity that never came? Every scene they had filmed together now felt like evidence against him, a reflection of the gradual erosion of connection. The audience is left wondering whether his regret will lead to change, or whether the weight of lost time has created a gap that can never be closed. Can love survive the accumulation of hesitation, or does it demand proof in every crucial moment? The day stretched on, each hour heavier than the last. Sumit's indecision became a mirror, reflecting every instance of delayed action. He realized that Jenny had packed not just her belongings but also her emotional resilience. She had acted decisively where he had faltered, claiming control of her life while he was trapped in reflection. He wanted to reach her, to apologize, to reclaim something he feared he had already lost, but she had already begun her journey away from the space he had filled with waiting. Ever notice how the one who walks away often holds more power than the one left behind? Even as the evening approached, Sumit's mind refused to settle. He replayed the moments he could have acted, the family pressures he tried to balance, the delayed promises, and the arguments postponed. He began to understand that the fracture wasn't caused by lack of love. It was caused by the consistent failure to act when it mattered most. Jenny's departure was inevitable, yet Sumit only recognized the consequences now. The audience is left suspended, wondering if realization alone is enough, or if some doors once closed never reopen. What would you do if someone you loved finally walked away because you waited too long to show up? By nightfall, the apartment was empty, the phone silent, the weight of absence settling over Sumit like a thick fog. Every memory became a reminder, every regret a lesson. He had loved her, yes, but love without decisive action had left him powerless. The audience feels it, the emotional collision of affection, fear, and too late realization. Sumit's journey, filled with hesitation, reflection, and desperation, sets the stage for what comes next. Can he reconcile the past and accept the consequences, or will the echo of her absence haunt every choice he makes from now on? Timing isn't just everything in love, it's the difference between holding on and watching someone walk away. What would you do if your love required immediate action? Jenny's decision was no longer a shadow in the background. It was real, solid, undeniable. The moment she stepped into the cab and closed the door behind her, everything changed. Sumit's face fell, a mixture of disbelief and panic crossing his features. 4 years they had tiptoed around promises, delayed conversations, postponed decisions. Now the delay was over. Kabhi socha hai quick pal mein sab kuch bedal ja sakta hai? Jenny kept her calm, but her eyes told a story of quiet exhaustion. She wasn't angry, not exactly. She wasn't spiteful either. She was simply done. Done with waiting for someone to act, done with being the one to compromise over and over, done with her own heart being held hostage by indecision. Every step she took away from the apartment was a small assertion of self-preservation. The streets of the city blurred past, but inside her, clarity rang louder than any fear. You can love someone, but love alone doesn't replace the need to protect yourself. Back inside, Sumit was frozen in a mix of guilt and panic. He replayed every delayed action, every hesitated step, every "I'll think about it tomorrow" moment. All those years of love without decisive action now felt hollow. The emotional neglect that had crept in slowly over the years finally revealed itself as an undeniable fracture. It wasn't malicious, not really, but negligence, even when unintentional, leaves deep scars. Kabhi socha hai ka silent neglect hurts more than fights? Jenny's mind was already in a different place. She remembered the late nights she had spent worrying, trying to push conversations that never gained traction. The countless "maybe he'll change" moments where hope and patience were tested over and over. She realized that love requires action, not just feeling. And when that action is consistently absent, it becomes a slow erosion of self. Ever felt like waiting for someone to finally care felt like standing in a storm with no umbrella? Sumit, meanwhile, attempted to speak, but his voice cracked. His words stumbled over each other. "Jenny, please wait, let's talk." His tone was desperate, almost childlike, because for the first time he realized that love alone hadn't been enough to keep her. Every hesitation he had taken in the past had brought them here. Every pause, every delay, every choice to prioritize anything other than her happiness had created a distance too wide to bridge. Why do we act only when the loss is staring us in the face? Jenny turned slightly, her expression calm but firm. "Sumit, I can't do this anymore." The words were simple, but each syllable carried the weight of years spent waiting. She wasn't leaving out of hate or spite. She was leaving to survive emotionally. It was a decision born from clarity, not impulse. The contrast between them couldn't have been starker. One frantically grasping at a love that had been tested beyond its limits, the other finally acting in her own best interest. Kabhi socha hai ka strong hona matlab ignore karna nahi, choose karna hoda hai? The emotional toll of long-term neglect became visible in the smallest gestures. Sumit's shoulders slumped, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. Jenny's hand paused on the door handle, her jaw tight but her posture steady. The years of waiting, of hoping for action, had created a silent dialogue between them. She had spoken through patience and quiet hints. He had responded too slowly. And now the cost of that slow response was unavoidable. Ever noticed how neglect creeps in slowly but leaves a mark that's impossible to ignore? As the cab pulled away, Jenny allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't triumph or mockery. It was relief. Relief that she no longer had to carry the weight of indecision, no longer had to wait for someone else to step up. Every turn of the wheels was a heartbeat of freedom, a confirmation that she could reclaim her own life. Sumit, watching from the apartment window, realized that freedom could feel like a punishment when it's given to the wrong person. Kabi Sosha Hai ka freedom is sometimes bittersweet for the one left behind. For Sumit, the realization sank in slowly. Panic of the first moments gave way to reflection. He saw for the first time with real clarity the consequences of inaction. Every delayed conversation, every avoidance of family confrontation, every hesitation to choose her over cultural pressure had built a wall that could not now be climbed. Jenny's absence highlighted not just the end of a relationship, but the emotional toll of years where love alone wasn't enough to sustain connection. Why do we underestimate the power of small, consistent choices in relationships? Jenny, meanwhile, navigated her new reality with a mixture of caution and liberation. Each decision was deliberate, choosing where to rest, what to eat, which calls to answer. Calm she projected masked the storm of relief and vulnerability beneath. She had been carrying the emotional labor of the relationship for years, and now she could finally set it down. Her choices were no longer dictated by someone else's delays or fears. Kabi Sosha Haiku emotional independence feels like a secret superpower you unlock only after heartbreak. Sumit tried to reach her one more time, leaving messages that echoed his panic, but the urgency he now felt was an echo of his past failures. Jenny's inbox, quiet for hours, now symbolized the consequences of neglect. His attempts to explain, to plead, to justify were too little, too late. The audience could feel the tension. Love was present, yes, but unaccompanied by action, it had failed to protect the bond they had shared. Ever wondered why some people stay and others leave silently, emotionally prepared while you scramble to react? Cab disappeared around the corner, taking Jenny and her choice to prioritize herself. Sumit remained in the apartment, grappling with guilt and grief. Each corner reminded him of moments where he could have acted differently, days, weeks, even years of hesitation flashing like warnings he ignored. He had been given a chance to act when it mattered most, but the opportunity had been squandered. Jenny's decision, firm and irreversible, became a mirror reflecting all that he had postponed. Kabi noticed how the consequences of delayed action hit hardest when it's too late. Jenny's freedom wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, and spiritual. Each breath she took outside the confines of waiting was a small victory over years of compromise and postponement. She could finally rest from the constant negotiation of love versus safety. Sumit's regret, in contrast, became heavier with each passing moment, the weight of what could have been impossible to shake. The audience is left at the edge of empathy and frustration. They see the tragedy of love unaccompanied by decisive action, and the bravery required to step away when staying would cost more than the heart could bear. Kabi Sosha Hai ku leaving someone doesn't always mean not loving them. It can mean loving yourself enough to walk away. Both of them were now forced to confront the long-term effects of emotional neglect. Jenny, in reclaiming herself, proved that patience has limits and resilience can only stretch so far. Sumit, left behind, confronted the cost of delay, hesitation, and fear of confrontation. The scene was raw, unfiltered, and relatable, a snapshot of how love without action can silently corrode a relationship until the only option left is departure. Ever realize that neglect isn't always loud? It can whisper slowly until it becomes unbearable? By the end of the day, the reality settled in. Jenny had chosen her path. Sumit had to face the consequences of his hesitation. Their story, once filled with promises and deferred commitments, now carried a lesson that resonates universally. Love needs action, attention, and timing, or it risks disappearing quietly, leaving regret and reflection behind. The audience is left with that sharp, lingering question. Could love have survived if one choice had been made sooner? Kabi Sosha Hai ka sometimes the smallest action could have saved everything? Emotional neglect isn't always obvious, it grows quietly. Love requires action. What choices are you postponing today that might cost tomorrow? The cab had disappeared, but the ripples of Jenny's departure were just beginning. Sumit sat in the quiet apartment, the walls echoing with the absence of her laughter, her presence, her compromise. Camera caught him scrolling through his phone, hesitating over messages he had sent and resent, each one more desperate than the last. Kabi Sosha Haika's silence can scream louder than words. Every notification pinged like a reminder that he had waited too long to act, that every delay had chipped away at what they once had. Meanwhile, Jenny's social media began to show subtle signs of her new reality. A story here, a post there, small glimpses of independence, moments of calm, sometimes even quiet humor. Nothing grandiose, nothing dramatic. Just a gentle reclaiming of her own life. Contrast between her measured steps and Sumit's panic was stark. Ever noticed how some people heal quietly while others scramble to fix what's already broken? Sumit's on-screen reflections were raw, almost painful to watch. In interviews and confessional shots, he recounted years of love, of care, of intention. But the intention alone couldn't erase the consequences of hesitation. Each time he paused mid-sentence, his eyes betrayed the weight of regret. He tried to explain, to justify, to contextualize his delays with family pressure, cultural expectations, and fear of conflict, but the audience could sense the tension between explanation and responsibility. Kabi noticed how excuses never repair what inaction has broken. Jenny, in contrast, moved with deliberate calm. Her actions were measured, reflecting both relief and lingering sorrow. She didn't post to provoke or to flaunt. She posted to assert, life continues, boundaries matter, self-respect endures. And yet, for those watching, there was an emotional punch in how composed she remained. She had learned the hardest lesson in relationships. Love alone cannot sustain a connection where action, commitment, and courage are missing. Ever felt like walking away quietly speaks louder than words ever could? As Sumit scrolled through comments from fans, friends, and critics, hope and disappointment collided in his chest. Some offered empathy, some offered criticism, some blamed him for not acting sooner. The voices of the public mirrored the split in his own mind, relief that she might be okay, panic that he had lost her forever. The interplay between external feedback and internal turmoil highlighted a universal truth. Human behavior is often reactive, shaped as much by fear and hesitation as by love. Kabi Sosha Haika sometimes our own mind becomes the harshest critic. On screen, Sumit attempted to reconnect. Calls went unanswered, messages unread, social media interactions left hanging. Each failed attempt added weight to his regret, teaching a lesson that is painfully common. Urgency after the fact is not the same as action in the moment. Jenny had made her choice, and with that, she had also set the terms of her emotional boundary. Ever realize that timing can be the most unforgiving factor in relationships? Jenny's own reflections, though less dramatic, were equally insightful. In interviews, she spoke about self-preservation, about the exhaustion of waiting, and about the importance of recognizing when love has to meet action to survive. She didn't dwell on anger or resentment. She focused on clarity, on reclaiming her voice, on the small joys of autonomy. And yet, the audience could feel the underlying heartbreak. Leaving someone you love is never easy, even when it is necessary. Kabi so Chahaika love and self-respect don't always travel together? Back in the apartment, Sumit began to piece together patterns he had ignored. Each delay, each small act of avoidance, each hesitant decision now looked different under the harsh light of consequence. The hope that she might return conflicted with the reality that she had already begun her own life. The disappointment settled in like a weight. He understood too late that love requires consistent courage, not just feeling. Why do we often wait for loss to teach us lessons we could have acted on years ago? The social media storm added another layer of complexity. Fans debated, sympathized, and speculated, but the most impactful moments were the glimpses into their real emotional states. Sumit's posts were filled with longing and regret, Jenny's with calm assertiveness and careful boundaries. Contrast was striking, one haunted by hesitation, the other freed by clarity. This mirrored a common human truth. When two people experience the same relationship differently, timing and action shape outcomes far more than feelings alone. Kabi noticed that perspective can change everything, even within the same relationship. On camera, Sumit reflected on family influence and cultural expectations. He spoke about how pressure from relatives had delayed his decisions, how he had tried to balance obligations with love, and how fear of confrontation often won over decisive action. The audience could empathize. Family pressure is real, social expectations are heavy, but the takeaway was subtle and sharp. External factors explain behavior, but they do not absolve it. Jenny's choice to leave was a clear message. Internal clarity and emotional preservation outweigh delayed actions justified by others. Ever realized that your choices define you more than the pressures around you? Jenny's emotional state also revealed nuances of human behavior. She showed vulnerability in quiet moments, frustration at unheeded cues, but also resilience in asserting boundaries. Her behavior wasn't dramatic or reactionary. It was intentional and deliberate. That intentionality contrasted sharply with Sumit's delayed urgency, highlighting a universal lesson. Proactive self-care often outlasts reactive attempts to repair damage. Kabi Sosha Haika calm decisiveness can have more impact than frantic pleading. Throughout the aftermath, moments of hope and disappointment intertwined. Sumit hoped for reconciliation, each notification a potential lifeline. Jenny, meanwhile, moved carefully, testing boundaries, asserting her pace. The tension between longing and self-preservation kept viewers engaged, reflecting the messy reality of human relationships. Hope can drive us forward, but action, or lack of it, ultimately decides the outcome. Ever felt hope and reality collide in ways that teach you more about yourself than anyone else? Even minor on-screen interactions carried weight. A glance, a brief nod, a half smile, tiny signals that could have been read differently if timing had been right. Sumit struggled to interpret them post facto, showing how human perception is often reactive and colored by regret. Jenny's measured responses reinforced the idea that when emotional labor is one-sided for too long, patience runs out. Consequences are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, devastating, and final. Kabi noticed that small signals matter more than grand gestures when trust is fragile. By the end of this period, both were navigating the fallout in distinctly human ways. Sumit was learning the hard way about the cost of hesitation, while Jenny was quietly reclaiming agency and emotional autonomy. The lessons were clear. Love needs timely action, boundaries matter, and sometimes stepping back is the bravest act. Social media, public reflection, and self-confrontation created a layered aftermath that combined hope, disappointment, and deep emotional insight into human behavior. Ever realized that observing without acting can be more painful than losing someone you love? The audience is left on edge, curious about what comes next. Would Sumit learn to act before it's too late in future relationships? Would Jenny find fulfillment now that she prioritizes herself? The unanswered questions plant seeds for reflection and anticipation, keeping viewers invested. Kabi Sosha Haika watching someone rebuild themselves can teach more about life than watching them fall. Hope is fragile, regret is heavy. Every choice you delay changes someone else's life. Are you acting or just waiting? The street was quiet, but Sumit's world had never felt louder. Every sound, every movement, every passing glance seemed amplified against the emptiness left by Jenny. Camera captured him as he stumbled forward, disbelief painted across his face, eyes searching for something that no longer existed in the physical space, but that lived vividly in his memory. His hand shook slightly, a mix of fear and urgency, as if the act of touching or holding could somehow rewind time. Kabi Sosha Haika sometimes, the loudest heartbreak is the one everyone can see but no one can fix. Jenny had made her choice. There was no hesitation now, no ambiguity. Her bags were gone, her presence erased from the apartment, the streets, the routines, and yet her influence lingered in every memory Sumit could summon. This wasn't a sudden loss. It was the culmination of years of waiting, years of unvoiced expectations, and years of deferred action. The audience could feel the weight of that delay. Every missed moment, every postponed decision, every "I'll do it tomorrow" piling up into a moment of undeniable finality. On screen, Sumit's collapse was visceral. Tears streamed freely, words caught in his throat, and the quiet, usually private suffering was now public. There was no dramatic shouting, no blaming Jenny in the moment. It was raw vulnerability laid bare. He was finally confronting the cost of hesitation, the cost of believing that love alone could carry a relationship without decisive action. Ever realized 'cause sometimes waiting to act turns love into a heavy burden you carry too late? Throughout their story, the camera had captured small hints, small open loops of what was to come. Subtle signs that Jenny had reached her breaking point, minor frustrations Sumit ignored, moments when family pressures outweighed personal courage. Now those loops snapped into sharp clarity. The hesitation that seemed understandable in the moment was revealed in hindsight as the difference between preservation and loss. Kabi noticed how hindsight turns small mistakes into life-changing lessons. The street, once mundane, became the backdrop for emotional education. Friends, neighbors, even bystanders captured glances of Sumit's heartbreak, yet no one could intervene. Every movement, every faltering step told a story of deferred courage. The public nature of his collapse added layers to the lesson. That delayed action isn't just regret inside your own mind, it resonates outward, impacting everyone who witnesses it. Social media and fan commentary later amplified this effect, showing how private emotional collapse can feel almost universal. Jenny, by contrast, was already steps ahead in her life. Quiet, composed, reflective, she moved with a deliberate energy that contrasted sharply with Sumit's panic. Every post, every story, every small assertion of independence acted as a counterpoint to his visible unraveling. Her calm wasn't arrogance. It was a testament to the hard-earned understanding that love without reciprocal action can't sustain itself. Ever felt relief in someone else's calm when your own panic feels uncontainable? Throughout the episodes leading up to this point, Sumit had tried to balance family obligations with love, cultural expectations with personal desire. On screen, each moment of delay, each polite avoidance had seemed minor, until it wasn't. Now, the full consequence unfolded in real time. This collapse wasn't just emotional, it was a reflection of behavioral patterns too long ignored. The audience could see, painfully, how the past informed the present. Kabi Sosha Haika patterns you ignore today can explode tomorrow? The weight of social media commentary also played its role. Viewers who had been following the story had formed opinions, offered sympathy, and critiqued decisions. For Sumit, each incoming message was another reminder that the world saw his regret before he could even articulate it. For Jenny, it validated the quiet decision-making that had allowed her to leave with dignity intact. Contrast between public reaction and private reality highlighted the human complexity of loss and delayed action. Ever noticed how public eyes magnify private heartbreak? Sumit's internal monologue, captured in confessional shots, revealed a stark truth. Love alone isn't enough. There's a need for courage, for timely decisions, for prioritizing the person you claim to love when it matters most. The heartbreak was a lesson writ large. Delayed action transforms potential into regret, hope into sorrow, and love into a haunting memory. Jenny's absence was not the result of a sudden whim. It was the natural outcome of years spent waiting for him to act, for him to choose, for him to step up. Kabi realized that waiting can silently erode the strongest bonds. Jenny's departure was also a lesson in emotional intelligence. Her actions, measured and deliberate, reflected self-awareness and respect for her own limits. She didn't gloat or dramatize, she simply reclaimed her time, space, and boundaries. Every small detail, the way she moved through her new routine, the way she avoided unnecessary drama, the way she prioritized herself, served as a reminder that agency and self-respect often speak louder than panic and pleading. Ever felt that calm decisiveness can hit harder than frantic efforts? As Sumit's public collapse continued, the show reminded viewers why earlier hints mattered. The hesitations, the missed signs, the subtle frustrations Jenny displayed all added up. Each had been a signal that love without action leads to emotional depletion. Now the consequence was visible, raw, and undeniable. For fans, the lesson wasn't just about Sumit or Jenny, it was a mirror to their own lives, a reflection on when love isn't enough and when timely courage is required to sustain meaningful relationships. Finally, the story began to close its loops. Moments that had planted questions months earlier now received answers. Sumit's hesitation, Jenny's patience, the influence of family, the cultural pressures, all culminated in the emotional apex. The heartbreak wasn't theatrical, it was real. It was the outcome of human behavior, choices, and the inevitable consequences of delayed action. And yet, even in this collapse, there was room for reflection, for learning, and for the viewer to see the interplay of love, regret, and growth. Kabi Sosha High could the end of one chapter teaches more than the highs of any romance ever could? The audience was left suspended in a delicate mix of empathy and contemplation. Jenny's calm autonomy and Sumit's raw regret offered a dual lesson in human behavior. Timing matters, action matters, and self-respect sometimes requires leaving the person you love behind. The narrative didn't offer easy closure, it offered something rarer, insight into the consequences of choices both taken and delayed. Timing is everything. Acting late doesn't just cost love, it teaches the hardest lessons in the public eye. Will Sumit ever learn before it's too late again? Time to breathe, to pause, and really see what happened. Jenny is gone, Sumit is left behind, and the street that once held their routine now holds only echoes of choices made and not made. But endings in reality TV are rarely about closure alone, they're about reflection. And here, the reflection is sharp, vivid, and painfully honest. What did Jenny gain? What did Sumit learn? And more importantly, what does the audience take away? Jenny walked away not because she stopped loving, but because she finally realized that survival in a relationship matters more than hoping someone else will finally act. For years, she had been waiting for Sumit to choose her decisively, to stand up against hesitation, fear, and family pressure. Each time she held her breath, waited for a sign, or softened her boundaries, she gave away pieces of herself. Her departure was the reclaiming of all those pieces, a statement that self-respect and emotional security are not optional, they're essential. Kabi Sosha Hai Ku loving someone deeply doesn't mean giving up on yourself? Sumit, on the other hand, is left to wrestle with the painful clarity that comes only after the moment is gone. He loved Jenny, yes, but love without timely action is powerless. Every missed opportunity, every delay, every hesitation now becomes a lesson etched in memory. Watching him on screen, stumbling through the streets, calling out, searching, you can almost see him mentally reviewing the years of small choices that added up to this. The irony is brutal. He reacts when it's already too late. Ever realized, 'cause sometimes the moment you finally understand love is when it's no longer there? The audience sees more than heartbreak, they see the patterns. The delayed action, the family pressure, the cultural negotiation, the avoidance of confrontation, all these factors converge to make the inevitable unavoidable. Sumit's regret is understandable, human, even sympathetic. But sympathy doesn't erase consequences. Jenny's calm departure is a mirror showing what's gained by decisiveness and self-preservation, while Sumit's collapse is a cautionary tale about the cost of procrastination in relationships. Kabi Sosha Ka life teaches more through regret than celebration? Looking back, there were signs everywhere. Small hesitations, subtle frustrations, unmet expectations, all on display in the episodes we watched. Every time Jenny's voice wavered, every time Sumit sidestepped a decisive choice, they were writing the script for this exact ending. And now the payoff is complete. Jenny steps into independence, Sumit grapples with loss, and the viewers are left questioning their own choices, their own boundaries, and how they respond when love requires courage. Yet even in this closure, there's nuance. Jenny didn't leave in anger or spite. Her departure was measured, a quiet assertion of agency that requires both empathy and respect to fully appreciate. She set limits, honored herself, and avoided unnecessary drama, showing that strength isn't always loud. It's deliberate, thoughtful, and sometimes silent. Meanwhile, Sumit's emotional unraveling teaches a different lesson. The consequences of delay aren't abstract, they're visible, tangible, and often public. Ever noticed how timing and choice can create a gap too wide to bridge, even with love? The aftermath shows us a pattern common across relationships we've watched on this channel. Love can be intense, even passionate, but without consistent action, it becomes fragile. Without prioritizing each other when it matters most, even the strongest feelings can unravel. Jenny and Sumit's story crystallizes this truth in a way that's painfully real. It's not about blame, it's about recognizing behaviors, understanding the stakes, and learning what must change to avoid repeating history. Social media and fan commentary continued to provide context. Fans debated who was right, who should have acted differently, and why this breakup felt inevitable. For Jenny, the public reaction validated her decision and reinforced her agency. For Sumit, it magnified the emotional weight, showing how private indecision can have public repercussions. The combined effect is a layered lesson. Relationships are lived experiences, but the lessons they teach ripple outward. Kabi Soshak, the world sees our choices more clearly than we sometimes do ourselves. So what did both of them learn? Jenny learned that waiting for someone else to prioritize you can't replace self-respect. She learned that love doesn't require endless sacrifice without reciprocity, and that independence is not betrayal, it's survival. Sumit learned that hesitation is costly, that love without decisive action can't protect or sustain, and that reflection after loss is far harsher than any preemptive courage could have been. These lessons are human, relatable, and serve as a mirror for anyone who has struggled to balance love, timing, and personal boundaries. And here's where we gently pivot to what comes next. Across the 90-Day Fiancé universe, this story isn't unique. Another couple, facing eerily similar pressures, is currently navigating the same traps: delayed action, family expectations, emotional withholding, and the subtle erosion of trust. Watching Jenny and Sumit gives us a lens to understand that next drama before it fully unfolds. We already know the patterns, the signals, and the heartbreak lurking if decisions are delayed. Ever wondered what happens when love meets the same old mistakes again? The channel's narrative now continues organically. Viewers who witness Jenny's calm independence and Sumit's regret are naturally curious. Will history repeat itself with this next couple, or will someone finally act in time? This payoff not only satisfies the arc we've been following for 58 minutes, but also creates anticipation, a sense of urgency, and a desire to keep watching, without forced cliffhangers or gimmicks. The story of Jenny and Sumit stands complete, yet it seeds curiosity about the patterns that recur in relationships under pressure. Reflecting on the journey, it's clear: love alone is never enough. Courage, timing, communication, and boundaries are equally essential. Jenny's story is a masterclass in self-preservation, Sumit's in the cost of hesitation. The audience walks away with a dual lesson: what to emulate, what to avoid, and why paying attention to emotional signals is critical. Every small choice builds toward a major outcome, and every delay can shift love into loss. Kabi Sosha, 'cause small decisions today decide heartbreak tomorrow? In the end, the takeaway is simple but profound. Honor yourself, act when it matters, and recognize patterns before they harden into regret. Love is powerful but not magical. It requires effort, courage, and timing to survive the external pressures, internal doubts, and family expectations that life throws at you. Jenny and Sumit's story crystallizes that truth in a way that's emotionally raw, human, and unforgettable. Timing is everything. What you act on today shapes your heartbreak tomorrow. Can you spot the same patterns before it's too late?